My name is Curt Jaimungal. I'm a filmmaker. My background is in math and physics, which naturally leads me to the topic of UFOs because unlike most of the scientific community or even academia at large, I don't see UFOs as being relegated to only those who are loons, let's say. In fact, in this episode, I use that word loon, but I'm more referring to what the perception of people who believe in UFOs are. I don't believe that's true. I don't think that thousands of people can be this incorrect, although there is obviously that chance. But I'm willing to look into this topic and treat it seriously, especially from the angle of physics, because if there's craft here, and aliens and so on, if there's craft here, extremely advanced craft, the way that they operate to me seems to indicate new physics. Even the way Bob Lazar, whether or not you believe Bob Lazar, even the way Bob Lazar described the physics working was that there was something called a strong force, and that once it's outside the domain of the atom, it translates into what's called gravity number 2. At least he calls it that. Now that I haven't seen in any textbook. The Standard Model is famous for not being able to unify gravity and itself, so I'm unclear as to how that works. Either way, it's extremely, extremely interesting. If you'd like to support more conversations like this, then please do consider supporting at patreon.com/KurtJaimungal or even PayPal. PayPal tends to go a bit more to me, but that's fine, whichever one works for you. Coming up in about a month, I'm speaking to Luis Elizondo, and so if you want, please email me, let me know the questions that you have. You can go to Theories of Everything, search that on YouTube, and you'll find the channel. Thank you so much, and enjoy this podcast with the great Kevin Knuth. He's a physics professor, an extremely brilliant physics professor, who's taking this topic seriously. And so, well, I'm interested. And judging by the fact that you're still watching this, you are as well. Enjoy. I just finished up an interview with Kevin Knuth. Kevin Knuth is a physicist at the University of Albany. Someone who I reached out to because he's one of the rare individuals interested in the phenomenon of UFOs, aliens, UAPs, whatever you would like to call them. And he's a respectable physicist, more than respectable. In fact, I didn't realize how excellent, creative, originative he is until I started researching about him after I had already booked the interview. And then I found out that not only is he interested in aliens, which is, it's not a goal of this channel at all. I'm more interested in the physics of aliens and what they have to say about consciousness as well as our role in the universe. Not only is he interested in that, but he's done significant research into the fundamental laws of physics, with him and his colleagues conceiving of a theory called influence theory. We'll get into that. The conversation is pretty much two parts, aliens and then fundamental physics. I didn't expect to get along with Kevin anywhere near as much as I did. He probably, to me, was one of the guests I felt the most relaxed with, for whatever reason. Maybe our personalities jive at some unconscious level. I don't know what it is, but hopefully you enjoy listening to the conversation as much as I had having it. Please, if you're interested in seeing or listening to more conversations like this, then consider donating at patreon.com/KurtJaimungal. Literally every one of those donations helps, not only financially, but motivationally. Thank you, and enjoy.
I watched several interviews over the last few months since we first connected. When was it? Early, I guess late fall or something. Mm-hmm. So I've watched several interviews. They're really engaging and interesting. And I feel jealous. You get to talk to all these interesting people. 2 hours of just one-on-one, which is quite nice, right? That's hard to get.
Which one did you like the most, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, that's a good question.
And please, I don't mean to put you on the spot if you're being overly polite and saying that you watched it. I don't mean to put you on the spot.
No, I enjoyed Eric Weinstein's. He was a lot of fun to watch. Yeah, he was quite dynamic.
I've been super excited to talk to you. When I first contacted you, it was because you had a paper, still do, paper out on UAPs, I believe they're called, which is UFOs essentially, for those who are listening, analyzing them. And you're a physics professor, so you're not some, let's say, loon from the periphery. And I thought, okay, that's interesting because very few academics actually pursue this. And I assume you're tenured, so very few tenured people, let alone non-tenured, pursue this. And then I realized you had some papers But this is a channel on theories of everything, which means we explore the foundations of mathematics, the foundations of physics. You have many papers. You've been thinking about this for quite some time, so you turned out to be far more interesting than I had initially thought. And that's not a slight. That's actually a huge compliment, because I see that you're able to derive spin and probability and space-time. When I say probability, I mean the way that it's used in quantum mechanics, and momentum from relatively simple ingredients. I was just reading about that recently. That is fun. We're going to talk about that later, if you don't mind.
No, that's great. It's one of my favorite topics, so.
Thank you for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to this.
For those listening or watching, there's going to be an exordium on aliens first. If you're mainly interested in the foundations of physics, then look at the timestamps and view or listen to accordingly. We're going to talk about aliens. Why don't you tell us about the Bethune encounter from 1951?
Right. So that encounter happened in 1951. Graham Bethune was he was a Navy pilot. They were summoned to Iceland, to Reykjavik, because in Iceland they were having problems with a UFO operating in the area. And I think it was operating in maybe near an airport or somewhere sensitive. I don't recall exactly what the difficulty was. And they were summoned there to basically check this out and help them out with this problem. They got there, didn't see anything. The thing was gone by that time, and they were heading back across the Atlantic from Iceland toward Newfoundland. And while they were flying, they saw lights on the surface of the water, on the ocean below, and it looked like city lights. And at first they thought they were out of off course, and so they double checked their course and realized no, they're on course. And they thought, well, there must be ships, maybe naval ships operating in the area or something. And as they got closer, these lights was a disc-shaped light, a ring, I guess, and it appeared to be under the water. And as they approached this thing shot up from the sea surface to their altitude in very short period of time, like a matter of a second or two. And it was basically a large disc. I think he described it as being 300 feet across. I actually printed out my paper here to remind myself some of these details. There's a lot of cases, and so it was several hundred feet across. The disc was slightly below their altitude, so they could actually see this disc. It had like glowing around the periphery, and as the object moved, the color of the light would change. So, and I think it's been described as looking like a plasma. So this object basically was with them for several minutes. They basically steered one person wanted to steer toward it, so they steered toward it, and eventually the thing took off. But it was seen by pretty much everybody on board. I think there were like on the order of 20 people or so on board who witnessed this thing. So this thing then took off, and they estimated its speed as it left to be about 1,500 miles an hour, which is about what was picked up on radar. They were close enough to Newfoundland that they were able to detect this on radar, and they confirmed that later.
When they say that it changed colors of the lights as it moved,
yeah,
is that akin to the Doppler effect, or is that something different?
It's something different, I think, because it would go from like a red violet to a yellow, and basically within those ranges. And I don't remember which way it went. When it was moving, it was yellow. When it was stationary, it was red. I think that's basically how it was. That detail I might not recall properly.
What do you attribute as the cause of that, or the reason for that?
I don't know. I mean, it's hard to figure out. I try to treat these observations as evidence, right? We're basically trying to do some kind of physics detective work to try to figure out what is this thing, how is it operating, how does it fly? You know, these are all the questions. How does it move so fast? These are the questions that come to me as a physicist. And a lot of times the light emitted by these things appears to be a plasma. So it could be that the object is ionizing the air around the craft, and that's what's emitting the light. And then as the object moves, maybe it's changing the electric fields around the object and then changing the excitation in the gas.
Okay, Professor, how did you get interested in this subject? You're not a fool. You're not just some loon. You're not what someone would think of as the stereotypical person who studies alien encounters or professes that aliens exist or UFOs or whatever it may be. How did you get what started you off on this journey?
I'm a physicist, so I'm curious. And I'm often surprised at how uncurious some of my colleagues are. But so I'm curious about these things, and I've always been curious. And when I went to graduate school, it would have been in the fall of 1988. It was probably about our first or second week in graduate school. So it was in September of 88. There was a cattle mutilation. I was at Bozeman, Montana. And there was a cattle mutilation, and I'd never heard of anything like a cattle mutilation. I grew up in Wisconsin, and we have cows in Wisconsin, and I've heard of cow tipping, but who's going to mutilate a cow? That's horrible. So I was pretty shocked by this, and there were a lot of people concerned about this on the news. They didn't know whether it was alien or if there were Satanists involved, and there were lots of theories floating around. So we were discussing this in the hallway. The new graduate students, the ones who basically moved to Montana and had never heard of this before, were discussing this, and it was a very heated discussion, very passionate, and everybody's upset and worried and wondering what the heck's going on. What kind of crazy place did we just move to, and are going to have to spend 4 or 5 years here? So, so this was really our concern. And while we were talking, one of the professors came out of his office and came down the hall to see what we were so excited about. And we told him what we were discussing, and he said, "Yeah, that's interesting." He said, "This happens here. We don't really know. They never figure out how the cows were mutilated and why. And there's very often UFOs seen in the area around the time. So it's interesting, but it's never figured out, and we just move on." And I don't think that helped calm us at all. And he then said, "But what's very strange, what's even more interesting," he said, "I have a number of friends in the Air Force up at Malmstrom Air Force Base, and they have trouble with UFOs flying over the missile sites, shutting down our ICBMs." And
this was in 1988?
This is 1988. I was told this by a professor at Montana State University. And now I'd never heard this before. In fact, I didn't hear about this publicly until I think around 2010, when Robert Hastings had a press conference with people from the Air Force, from Malmstrom Air Force Base. And so, to be honest, when the professor walked away, we laughed about it. I mean, there's UFOs shutting down nuclear missiles, and
he was a professor of what? What was his specialty?
He was a physics professor.
What particular field of physics?
I don't remember who it was, because it was my first week there and I didn't know all the professors.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I have a guess who it could be, but I don't want to say because
yes.
I don't know for sure.
Yeah. Have you ever tried to reach out to that person afterward?
No, I haven't. It's unfortunately I'm at that age where a lot of my professors have passed away, so I didn't try reaching out. That probably would be a good idea, though.
Okay, continue.
That's a good suggestion. Thank you. Yeah, so we laughed about it, and then it was kind of a running gag through the whole semester, and there are UFOs shutting down our nuclear missiles. And, we would always giggle about that. But it really just seemed unthinkable because these are restricted areas. If we have somebody coming in shutting down our nuclear missiles, our military, if a foreign nation did this, we would go to war over it, and probably nuclear war because the nuclear missiles are involved. And so it's unthinkable that we wouldn't do anything. And so it was really hard to believe. And it just, I just remember the event. It was just something somebody said once and went on. And it wasn't until maybe 2015 or so that I was preparing for an astronomy class. And we were going to talk about astrobiology, and I had some students asking me about the possibilities of aliens visiting Earth and wanted me to talk about that. So I was online looking for papers, anything that I could use to put together a reasonable lecture on the topic. And I stumbled on the Robert Hastings press conference, and where he had, I think, 6 people all working at nuclear missile sites. I think 3 of them were from Malmstrom Air Force Base. And I started watching this, and I was just watching with disbelief, thinking, oh my God, I heard about this in 1988. And the professor who told me then said it was going on then. It was in the present, happening in 1988. And these people in the press conference, Robert Salas was one of the prominent people. He was talking about an event in 1966. And I thought, well, wait a minute. You can't have a crazy story like this. If somebody's making this up in 1966, it's not going to persist until 1988. These are professionals, and they're serious professionals. They have to have, clearance and specialized training, and these are secure areas. They're not nutcases, and they're not going to joke about things like this, and certainly not for 20 years. And I thought, there has to be something to this. Something must be going on. And I thought, this really has to be real. I can't see any other way around it. And I can imagine, and at that point, I could imagine that we don't do anything because the assumption is that it can't be real, so it's not doing anything. and I think that's why there's been a lot of inaction and lack of interest.
I'm going to share my screen, and then you're going to, if you don't mind, please tell me what is going on here. Okay, with this.
Right. So basically, what I'm basically doing here is if you, let's see, so they were estimating, so Graham Bethune said that it took...
Yeah, this is from 1951. This
right,
is not from Japan or Nimitz.
Right. So here, the panel C, I work from panel C, because so they estimated the distance to be about 5 to 7 miles away. So he wasn't exactly sure how far away it was. And so what I did basically is I used a... basically, he's estimating this looking out from the plane. He's looking down at an angle in front of the plane. And so I treated that angle to have some uncertainty. So he's going to be off by, and I think I say what it is in the paper. He's off, potentially off by so many degrees. So what I did is I did a Monte Carlo sampling, where I basically randomly sampled angles with a Gaussian distribution about the angle that, he would have been looking or thought that he was looking. And that gives you a distribution of distances. So I'm basically doing a Monte Carlo sampling to take into account potential errors. My question, the question I've always asked when, when pilots are confronted with these stories is the question that comes to my mind is how wrong could they be? These are trained individuals. Millions of dollars go into their training, which doesn't mean they're perfect. But then that begs the question: how imperfect are they? How wrong could they be about some of these facts? And and I can imagine for instance, if they estimate the size of the object as being 300 feet across or something, how wrong could you be with that? Well, maybe it was 100 feet across, but it certainly wouldn't have been 30. I mean, nobody's going to mistake a 30-foot disc for a 300-foot disc.
Well, you wouldn't even be able to see that if you're 5 miles away approximately. So he's 5 miles away and he's looking down and he's able to discern it?
Yeah.
5 miles away, huh? And he was able to see that it looked like city lights?
Yeah, it looked like it was a circular group of lights.
Okay. Now let's look at this. Then you estimated the altitude. And also, by the way, just as a technical aside, why are you using Monte Carlo? It seems like, just help edify me here, it seems like you have a Gaussian distribution or some sort of distribution. Why not just use that distribution? Why do you have to then sample it so that it's spiky at the edges?
Oh, I could have used that distribution. The problem is that you'd then have to, in estimating estimating the speed of the object, I then have to basically use the uncertainties in each of those quantities that go into calculating the speed of that object. And so it requires transforming, all of these probability distributions, which is quite tedious.
Okay.
And so doing it with Monte Carlo, I'm going to get appropriate answers, and it's a faster way to do it. Otherwise, I might have to take approximations and things like this to pull it off analytically, which I didn't want to have to do.
I see. The computer can't do that? It's not as simple as putting it into Wolfram Alpha or Mathematica?
No, not always, because you've got to, you're taking derivatives and inverses and things like this. You've got, so.
Okay, and if you see me looking off over here, it's that I also have some of the studies on this side as well. So please,
okay.
You're the only thing I'm paying attention to.
No, that's fine.
Then you got times going on here. You have altitude, and you have minimum log 10. Okay. Well, that's the acceleration.
That's the acceleration.
Altitude. All right. Okay, altitude and times. And these are referring to, the altitude is referring to what?
The altitude is referring to basically the altitude of the craft. So how far it went up from the sea surface.
Great. And then the time is referring to how long did it take from the sea surface to that altitude?
Yep.
Okay. Simple. Great. Now let's get to Japan Airlines Flight 1628 in 1986.
Right. That's another instance where I knew about that incident in 1986. I remember watching it on NBC News with Tom Brokaw, and I remember him discussing this and then playing some of the audio from the pilot and the air traffic control. And I remembered thinking that this is really pretty amazing. You've got a large jet. What is it? 747, I guess it was, and it's basically they were flying from Paris to Tokyo, bringing Beaujolais Nouveau. So here, now we can all have a giggle, ha ha ha, he's got a plane full of wine, right? But, so
that's what the aliens were after all along.
That's right.
And you were an undergrad at this point?
I was an undergrad at the point, yeah.
Studying math and physics.
Math and physics, yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, so the and you can actually still find the news reports online, the videos, people have put them online, but the so as they're approaching Anchorage, Alaska, and they see some lights in the distance basically approaching the plane. And so they're concerned, so they call air traffic control to see if they have any traffic for them. And air traffic control says negative. They said, well, we see traffic. There we've got several craft approaching. And so they're very concerned about this. As they're approaching Anchorage, they have 2 craft approaching, and then shortly thereafter, a larger craft approaches, and the thing is walnut-shaped and glowing. And at one point, it's in front of the aircraft, and the pilot described it as so big that they couldn't see out of the windscreen. So, I mean, you're a pilot of a jet, and you've got something in front of you that you can't see beyond. That's a scary prospect. So he's panicked and calling air traffic control, and they're not picking anything up on radar except his plane. And at some point, the military is contacted and gets involved, and on military height finding radar, they pick up the larger craft on the plane and the airplane. So they pick up both objects. So the military is able to detect this with their radar.
Were you able to estimate the size of the craft?
No. He estimated it to be the size of, I think it was 3 747s. So it's basically the size of an aircraft carrier. So you've got
in the sky.
You've got a flying aircraft carrier shaped like a walnut. Now you have to ask, how wrong can the pilot be? I mean, it's all right. Maybe it wasn't as big as an aircraft carrier. Maybe it was just the size of a destroyer. Still, that's pretty amazing, right?
He said it was glowing.
And glowing, yeah.
And this was at night?
I don't know what time it happened. I don't recall. That's all recorded, but I don't recall off the top of my head.
Is that it with the Japan Airlines flight, or is there more?
No, well, the interesting thing is the object follows him for 40 minutes. So it isn't just like, I saw it, it was gone. No, this thing basically kept along with the airplane for 40 minutes. And it basically moved around the airplane as time went by. So it would go, so the military height finding radar, and this radar data exists. You can look at this. The military height finding radar is sweeping every 10 seconds. And the craft is about 7.5 miles away from the airplane. And in one sweep, it'll be at 1 o'clock. In the next sweep, 10 seconds later, the thing could be at 6 o'clock. And so the thing's literally jumping around this airplane, and the pilot's panicked. He actually takes some evasive maneuvers at some point to try to evade the object, and thought that he didn't see it. And the Air Force comes on and goes, no, it's behind you. It's still following you. It's behind you. So the thing basically followed him for 40 minutes. And then he went down and landed.
When you said that the pilot said that he couldn't see beyond the ship, if it's 5 miles away and it's the size of a carrier, why can't you see beyond it? You can see the edges of it, no?
Oh, well, this one was moving around. So at one point it was very close, he had said. And
I see.
It was
initially.
He couldn't see beyond it.
So initially, how close do you estimate it was to him?
I have no idea.
Let's say it was the size of a carrier, then it would have to be. I'm sure that's a simple trigonometry. Okay.
Yeah, you could figure out how close it would have to be. For much of the event, it was about 7.5 miles away, according to the radar. And the sweeping, it wasn't 10 seconds, it was 12 seconds. So it was every 12 seconds.
Great. Okay. This data exists, meaning that it's public.
Yeah. The radar data, yeah.
How does that go online? Does someone leak it or does someone release it? Right.
It was John Callahan, who was FAA Chief of Accidents and Investigations at the time. They basically reenacted the situation in one of their testing centers, and they record and that's where the data comes in, so they can reenact it. And then he recorded that and basically saved that himself. He saved a copy for himself. And he claims that at one point, the President Reagan's scientific advisory team met with him along with CIA officials and FBI and a number of people, and they confiscated all of the data he had. Although he didn't tell them about everything, he had some of it stashed away. But they met with him and they were very excited because they said that this was the longest encounter that they had had any data for.
Okay, let's get to the Nimitz encounter. I'm sure many people are familiar because that's David Fravor, if I'm correct.
Right.
Okay. And that's in 2004, I believe?
Right.
Okay. Why don't you give a brief rundown for the people who are unacquainted with this?
All right. So in 2004, you had the Nimitz carrier group was off the coast of San Diego, California, about 100 miles, 150 miles off the coast. And Senior Chief Kevin Day was operating radar for much of this time. And for overall, for a period of a couple of weeks, he was picking up anomalous radar targets basically just appearing on his radar at about 80,000 feet, which is really very high altitude. Jet airplanes, passenger jets fly around 35,000 feet. So these radar targets are appearing at about 80,000 feet, and they typically were appearing south of Catalina Island or near San Clemente Island, and then they would track south at about 100, 120 knots down to Guadalupe Island in Mexico, where they would then drop off as radar. And so nobody knows what happened to them after that. So having an aircraft flying at 80,000 feet at only 100 knots is almost impossible. There's not much air up there, so you need to go much faster to have lift. So that's already anomalous. So this is anomalous in the other direction. They're moving too slowly, right? And Kevin Day had observed these, and they weren't they weren't where they were operating, so this wasn't really a big concern at this point. And at one point, he said that there were times when they would drop from they came in at 80,000 feet when they appeared. They would drop down to 28,000 feet, and that's when they would track south at 100 knots. So even at 28,000 feet, you aren't going to be flying a plane at 100 knots. But from 28,000 feet, they would periodically drop down to the sea surface, and that amount of time to go from basically at a constant altitude, 28,000 feet, to sea surface, which is zero, they would do that in about 0.78 seconds. So it was less than a second to go from basically rest in the y direction at 28,000 feet to rest in the y direction at 0 feet.
Okay, now to interject, how long would that take if it was free falling?
I'd have to do the calculation, but it would be...
Let's say, estimate it to a significant digit. It's fine. You can be off by a factor of 10.
Right, so the time is going to be basically twice the height divided by the acceleration. The acceleration is about 10 meters per second squared, 28,000 feet. 2 times 8,000 is 16,000, and now I'm going to divide that by 10 meters per second squared, and I'll get, so that's 16,000 divided by 10, which is 1,600, and then we take the square root of that, so that's going to be 40
seconds?
40 seconds.
Okay. They did it in 1 second. So that means...
Yeah, less than 1 second, yeah.
Okay.
And they came to a stop.
Let's say our fastest accelerating technology downward, whatever that is, whatever kind of craft that is, how fast approximately do you think we could do it?
Right. If you could dive at 10G acceleration and then slow down for the other 10G, then you're accelerating halfway, so we can find the time to the halfway point. But if you work this out, it's 1/4. It'll be 1/4 AT squared. So the total time is going to be basically So we've got 32,000 divided by 100, so that's 320 seconds squared. So then now we have to take the basically the square root of 320. So it's less than 400. The square root of 400 is 20, so it's going to be a little less than 20 seconds.
Okay, let's take a look at some more. I'm going to share my screen with you and so what are we looking at over here? This is the Nimitz video. And then we got different models, and we have what is log Z, what is log L, what is A, and so on. So
all right. Yeah. So what we're doing is we're testing different dynamic kinematic models. These are basically in this section of the paper, we're analyzing the video that was released by the U.S. Navy. And the last few seconds of that video, 32 frames or something, the object is locked on. It begins, the targeting system is locked onto the object, and it loses lock, and the object takes off to the left. Now, it's not a very impressive departure, and none of these videos are nearly as interesting as what the pilots describe these things as doing. So I'm convinced we were given probably the most boring videos they could find, and very possibly videos they didn't expect anything anomalous to come from. So that acceleration doesn't look very dramatic, but so we basically tested several models. One of the models is that it accelerated, just accelerated off the screen, so it's constant acceleration. Another one was it accelerated for a shorter period of time and then just coasted off the screen at constant velocity. And so those are the basic models we were testing. And so...
And why do you think it is that they didn't... Do you believe that they have more interesting footage and they chose to release this? They being the U.S. government?
Yeah, I'm just guessing that based on what the pilots have what numerous pilots have said in these types of encounters, these things behave much more amazingly than the footage they released. So David Fravor, when he encountered the Tic Tac object and it finally took off, he said it accelerated like it was shot from a gun, and it was gone out of sight in 2 seconds. So clearly this acceleration isn't that fast. So that's what I mean by that.
Why do you think it is that they released the video, if you were to speculate at all, the U.S. government?
That I don't know. I know that Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon were working on the inside to try to get some of this information out, because they weren't able to freely discuss this, amongst the intelligence community. So there's probably multiple concerns there. I mean, one is that if you're not able to, the Navy was having problems with these things, right? But they're not able to discuss, these objects and have it taken seriously. So now what do you do? In 2015, for example, they were having nearly daily encounters with UFOs. And so you've got pilots who are not trained for these types of encounters. Some of these were happening in the Persian Gulf area while they were operating, so you've got a military campaign going on. These guys are going on bombing runs in Syria, and they've got to fly through UFOs over the Persian Gulf and then go to Syria and then conduct their military operations and come back. And that's a huge hazard. I mean, you don't need a pilot shaken, from a UFO encounter and then go into a war zone. That's extremely dangerous. And so that's one reason why when people say, oh, they're just drones and the U.S. is just testing them, no, you aren't going to test them by putting pilots in danger in a war zone. That's not going to happen.
What are some other arguments against them being drones?
I mean, first, their accelerations that we estimated are way off the charts. People can't handle much more than 10 to 15 Gs for any period of time. 13 Gs, the new F-35 fighter I think is rated for 13.5 Gs, and at 13.5 Gs, its wings will rip off. So you can't accelerate an airplane more than about 13, 15 G. Some missile frames can handle higher accelerations. They can maneuver up to about 30 Gs of acceleration, and some can structurally withstand up to about 60 Gs. So most of our equipment can't handle more than 100 Gs. And
that's in one direction, let alone stopping and then turning around.
Yeah, well, I mean, it doesn't matter whether you stop and turn around because you've got so many Gs here and then so many Gs again. So they're doing it over and over again. It's insane.
And what are the Gs associated with these craft?
Well, the highest one we estimated was about 5,700 Gs. That was the one picked up on radar by Senior Chief Kevin Day while he was on the USS Princeton with the Nimitz carrier group. That's the one that drops from 28,000 feet to sea level in 0.78 seconds. So you're looking at over 5,000 Gs of acceleration in that case. The other situations were a bit lower. I think the lowest ones we had were maybe, I think the video from the 2004 Nimitz video when the targeting computer loses track and the thing takes off to the left, you're looking at about 78 Gs. The object's moving to the left and away from the airplane at that point.
See, what strikes me about this paper is going through it. The mathematics isn't beyond high school or beyond first year, that's for sure. And I'm wondering, why hasn't an analysis like this, which seems like anyone could have done it, why hasn't it been done before? Is it simply the stigma against analyzing aliens?
I think that's the problem. I mean, you've got numerous capable physicists who have commented on these things, and you've got enough information to basically do a back of the envelope estimation of the acceleration, and they're more willing to say, well, it's probably an atmospheric effect. Who knows what it could be? That's usually the response you get from a professional physicist, which is problematic. This is a calculation they ought to be able to do.
Who else in the physics community, professional physics community, is studying this besides you and your co-author?
Well, let's see. A colleague of mine, Matthew Shadagas at University of Albany, is also studying this. Other physicists, I know of a few people. Let's see. I don't know if they're all physicists. Some are engineers.
Do you know of any physicists who are interested but tell you this behind closed doors?
Yeah, that's basically the situation. You've got a number of people who are interested in studying this, and the problem is there's a paucity of data. We don't have any real data to work with for the most part. You have witness testimony, and some of that paper is based on witness testimony, and we did the best we could with it, and I think it gives you a ballpark estimate of what was observed. But you really want radar data. You really want to be able to triangulate positions with multiple cameras. You want to do all sorts of things like this. That would be ideal.
Are these spacecraft getting faster with time? What I mean by that is, let's say someone was analyzing Earth's crafts. I imagine that what they would see is our top speed would increase over the decades, because it has. However, with these crafts, do you see them as being predominantly the same since the 60s or since the 50s? That's
a good question. I mean, I don't think that we have that information. You'd have to look at them for a very long period of time, and there have been sightings of objects like this, and if they are alien spacecraft, which we really haven't proven that that's the case yet, if they are alien spacecraft, then we wouldn't know, from some of the Roman reports of flying shields We aren't able to estimate speeds and accelerations in those cases. We don't have that detailed information. So,
what's the Romans' report of flying shields?
There's several reports in Roman history of Orbis Clypeus, I think they're called, but they're flying shields basically. And so I can send you references for this. There's a couple of papers, one on UFOs in classical antiquity, and another paper on the same topic.
Yes. Do you mind making a note to send that to me later?
Yeah, certainly.
You're only sending me about Romans, or are you sending me? Is there a list of UFO sightings or potential UFO sightings across history?
There's a book by Jacques Vallée.
I keep hearing about this person.
Called Wonders in the Sky, and he has a compilation of curious accounts, basically, that could be interpreted as, maybe the same type of phenomena.
Jacques Vallée, huh? Is he still alive?
Yeah. Yeah, he lives in the Bay Area.
Okay. I know that this is... as a physicist, you want to stay within what you know. But if you don't mind speculating, why do you think they're shutting down our nuclear devices? Do you think that that's just a side effect? It's inadvertent? Like maybe when they accelerate that happens for whatever reason? Or do you think it's purposeful? Why do they selectively shut it down in this area and only at certain times?
That's a good question. I don't know the manner in which they were shut down. This stuff is still, I don't think the military has admitted that that's actually happened. You have people who worked at these sites who claim that it happened. The most detail I've heard was from Robert Salas, and he said that, I believe it was him, and he said that it was a failure of the, basically a failure of the navigation and guidance systems, and that then led to a shutdown. So that's curious, because now if you have the inertial navigation systems failing, could that be due to how the craft operates? So maybe it's just a side effect. At this point, this is extremely hypothetical, so I am just making up stories here. But if you have a craft that basically is somehow warping space-time or affecting space-time, and you've got an inertial navigation system sitting nearby, that could affect it. So, and then if their systems are set up so that they shut down whenever one of these things goes haywire, then the UFO flying over it could be enough to trigger that to shut down. Is it on purpose? Is it an accident? These things have to be studied, and we have just gotten to the point where people are admitting that they're real. After 80 years, I think that's to me, I find that a little scary. We've had this going on for about 80 years, and it took us 80 years to decide that they're real. But we still don't know what they are, nor what they're doing here.
80 years, you're referring to the 50s?
Or from the 40s, yeah, late 40s, yes. Yeah.
There aren't any reports from the U.S. government of UFOs prior to the 40s?
I don't know about from the U.S. government. There are reports of the UFOs prior to that, easily into the 1800s, numerous ones, yeah, by ship captains and things like this. These things have been seen for a long time, which is another argument against them being American or Russian, Chinese drones. They've been observed well before people could fly, so...
There's someone who came out recently, I believe they're Israeli, talking about UFOs. I don't know, I forgot the person's name, I don't know the story. Do you mind edifying me as well as the audience?
Oh, yeah. Well, that was an interesting story. I don't remember his position, and I don't remember his name, but he was high up in the Israeli military, and he claimed
Ham Eshed or Haim Eshed.
Yeah, is he the one who
Israeli director of the space program, it said.
Right, so is he the one that claimed that they were in contact with alien civilizations?
I have a question here for Avi Loeb from earlier today that talks about this. So the question was, I would like to hear Avi Loeb's opinion on the claims of former Israeli director of the space program, Haim Eshed, brought forward. He must have heard about this, so-and-so. They went through the news briefly. Was it a hoax? And I guess this person isn't recapitulating what Hen, or Hem Eshed said, because he's assuming Avi Loeb already knew about it.
Some government officials, have had some pretty exciting or interesting claims, and it's, these still aren't substantiated. So it's difficult. It's difficult to know how much of it is a claim, how much of it is a mistake, how much of it is a problem with the individual. We still have all of those questions.
When I spoke to Jeremy Corbell, he seemed to think that the aliens were shutting down the nuclear arms as a flex of their sovereignty. And, well, what you're saying is it might be inadvertent. I'm also wondering, why is it that people can come out like David Fravor and so on, other people, like you mentioned, from the government, and not be sued by the government or shushed by the government or simply destroyed, killed? How are they allowed to speak about it? I know you don't particularly like Bob Lazar or believe Bob Lazar, but let's imagine Bob Lazar is correct. Let's just imagine. How is he allowed? There are people like him, maybe not to the same degree.
Right. That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know much about workings in the intelligence community, so I'm not sure how they would operate. They may have opted to eliminate individuals in the past. I think at this point it would be rather, it would be fishy and would probably draw more attention than anything. So I don't know. And, if they, if you have a lawsuit where you sue them for talking about this, well, then now you've basically admitted that it's true, or some aspect of it's true. And so that would be a problem too.
Something else that's puzzled me about aliens at all is that our rate, if I'm just going by our rate, of technological improvement is drastic every decade and for sure every century. So some people would critique every decade like Peter Thiel, but at least every century, that's for sure. And when you take a look at, let's imagine these aliens are going back to their planet. That takes a couple years. From some other time frame. It may take them a day
proper
or so.
Time, they can do it in a few, depending on their accelerations, it could be a few days to a few months. For us, it could take 1,000 years or couple hundred years. So, yeah.
So let's just imagine they're going back to their little alien civilization in some other planet. Okay, then I would imagine that planet has increased its age by maybe a few decades. Then I would imagine that when they come back, they should be far more technologically advanced. So every decade for us, when they're going and coming back, presuming they're going and coming back, I don't see why it should look the same at all, because I would imagine that if it was us, we would look vastly different every century or so, especially a century from now. Maybe our planes look like triangles. Maybe a century from maybe 200 years from now, our planes would look like dust. And then maybe farther, it'll look like a planet and so on. You understand the idea.
Yeah.
So why do you think it is that there's somewhat of a constancy of the reports in terms of how they look, of visual inspection, maybe even their speed of aliens, given that we are so quick with our technological advancement and they're presumably far more advanced than us, which means their trajectory of, let's say, Moore's Law or whatever it is that they follow should be farther along in the exponential curve.
No, that's an excellent question, and I have a hypothesis that could answer that, and I came up with this in response to the general reaction of so it's we know well that if you can get a craft up to relativistic speeds, if you could engineer something like this, so yes, huge engineering feat.
Whatever.
We don't even know how you'd pull it off.
Doesn't
whatever.
matter. Yeah.
But if you could, then time dilation works in your favor. It works in the favor of the traveler, right? So you could conceivably leave your home world. Let's say you come from 1,000 light years away. You leave your home world and you travel to Earth, and you can travel close to the speed of light. So you can get here in a few weeks. So it's a few-week trip to Earth. That's nice for you. It'll take about 1,000 years if that planet's 1,000 light years away from Earth. It'll take 1,000 years in the galaxy frame. So 1,000 years will pass on Earth and 1,000 years will pass at home. And then now they hang out here. They go into, they land in a meadow and I chose that on purpose, and take some biological samples, and then they take off and head home. Now, on the way home, it's another 1,000 light years. So for us in the galaxy's frame, it's going to take another 1,000 years for them to get home. Maybe a couple weeks for them again. So for them, what was a few month trip has turned into a 2,000-year trip back at home. And the argument, while relativity would work in favor of the traveler, the question is, who would do that? Because what society would ever conceive of a mission that would take 2,000 years? Because the people who designed the mission are never going to see the results of it. And the travelers are going to come back to a culture that's totally different than the culture they left because of the reasons that you're stating. So why would anyone do this? Well, the supposition is that they are going to go home, and that they live on a planet. And I think that's what we have implicitly assumed there. What we've neglected to remember is that even on Earth, there exist nomadic tribes, and there still exist nomadic tribes. So you could pull this off if you were a nomadic society, not a planet-bound society. So imagine, you and me, we want to go space traveling, but we don't want to be 1,000 years apart. I'll head off to the star Rigel or something 900 light years away. You pick another place to go about as distant, and we plan to meet back up here at a certain time in the future. So we can plan our trip accordingly so that we come back here at the same time. And it may be 2,000 years in Earth's future, but we don't care. We can still meet up and compare notes, and then we can travel off again. So you can imagine that you could have a whole breakaway civilization like this, where it literally is a civilization of travelers. And that's what they do. They travel and they explore. And they periodically meet up. They have meetup points and meetup times that are all prearranged, or they have some algorithm for this. And they can then exchange goods. They can exchange information and travel again. And what they're basically doing is they're using relativity in their favor, using time dilation in their favor, and they're basically, but they're not just space traveling, they're also time traveling into the future, right? So they're traveling through space, interstellar space, but they're also traveling through time by racing forward into the future with respect to the rest of the galaxy.
So all of them and their friends are also traveling around to meet up at the same 2,000-year future relative to the galaxy.
Yeah, they might not have a single meetup place. They might have multiple meetup places and just randomly meet up. But yeah, you could do it various ways. And if that was the situation, then you could take advantage of relativity to travel, galactic distances. And the advantage is, it would be very interesting because you could. So imagine that you accelerate, at 1,000, if you could accelerate at 1,000 G, like, similar to some of these objects we've observed. You could accelerate at 1,000 G halfway, decelerate at 1,000 G the other half. You can get from one side of the galaxy to the other in just a couple weeks, a couple months. So let's say it takes you 3 months to get from one side of the galaxy to the other, and then you can come back. And when you come back, it's taking you a 6-month trip, but in the galaxy's frame, it's going to be about 100,000 years later. So you get to travel through time, and so now your perspective of the universe is very different. First, when people look at you, they're going to see the same ships. You're traveling in the same craft. And why do these craft not evolve? Because it's actually the same one. It could actually be the same craft. So the same craft that was observed in Roman times could literally be the same object with the same, beings in it, 2,000 years later. They could literally be the same objects.
Fascinating. So let's imagine this is a 10-day journey for them.
And for them, it's a couple days. Yeah. So they might be very Now, for them, we are ephemeral, right? And because when they come back, you and I are going to be gone. So there's no point in making friends. There's no point in landing on the White House lawn and introducing yourself to the president, because the next time they come back, the United States isn't even going to be here. It'll be something else, another culture. So there's no point in getting to know the locals. So it could explain why they, and if they study, you could then actually study a civilization. So their concept of a civilization and how you study civilizations would be very different. You can actually watch civilizations evolve.
Right.
We're kind of like fruit flies to them, right? So they could...
That's right. It's fascinating. So it would be like, imagine, for the people listening, to get another analogy for me as well, is I'm pressing play on a movie, and then I'm speeding up the movie. You can do that on Google. You can speed up by 2x. But imagine you can speed up by 300x, or 1,000, or whatever it may be. 1,000,000x. And then every once in a while, you come into the room, you're like, oh, that's an interesting part of the movie. Then you walk out of the room, then you come back. Okay, so for you, it's just a couple days, and you have a few of your friends who are doing something similar. So from the movie's perspective, if they were to look out, they would see, oh, there's someone who has similar characteristics as the person before. Fascinating. Why do you think it is that aliens look somewhat like us? At least from the reports. And again, right. And again, we're taking some of these reports to be serious, because just like we're taking some of the reports of the crap to be serious, it seems like it's not that wild. They're not octopus. They're people with 2 eyes, 4 limbs.
So that's a good question. I don't have a good answer for that. I would imagine that if that's really the case, then I imagine that it could very well be a situation of convergent evolution.
Right.
And we don't really understand yet how, different environmental factors affect evolution, but, we can look at Earth's history and get some ideas. So fish shapes, right? The fish shape works great in water, right? Nice and streamlined if you're shaped like a fish. And there have been other things with fish shapes, right? The same shapes. You have fish that are fish shaped. You have reptiles that are fish shaped, the ichthyosaurs, right? And you have mammals that are fish shaped, whales and dolphins. So that same shape evolved multiple times because it's an efficient shape. So having 2 free hands is very useful to building spaceships. So maybe if you look like an octopus and you're very brilliant, you don't, or if you're a dolphin, dolphins don't have thumbs. Go back to an Onion article where so dolphins don't have thumbs, so they're not going to build spaceships. It doesn't matter how smart they are. That's not going to happen. And so it really could be something like that.
Another, just to go off on a speculative jump, I've heard this said by some of the people who have encountered aliens or supposedly encounter aliens, that we're an experiment. So one is that, okay, this is just what happens with convergent evolution. But another is that they somehow caused us. And then that's why there's a correlation. And that one is fascinating, because I remember hearing someone say, it might have been Lazar, it might have been someone else say that, I don't think it was Lazar, someone say that the aliens referred to us, this is obviously presuming that we could speak to them or that it's all true. The aliens refer to us as carriers or of vessels of something. Of what? Now that's scary. Let's just imagine it's true. Of what? Of consciousness? Of a soul? Of biological material? Of what?
Yeah, some of these stories are very strange, and it's really hard to know what to make of them. It's far easier to just say it's got to be nonsense, right? And we've been down that road several times now.
Well, you just gave me I don't know, was this something you've been working on for a little while, that little theory where they come in and out and...
Yeah, for about a year. I came up with it about 2 years ago, and I presented that idea at one of the conferences with the Society for Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies. So I presented it to them. I have a video of that talk that I can give you the link to.
Please write that down if you don't mind, because even if I don't watch it, which I hopefully do, I hopefully get the time to watch it, I'll still include it in the description so other people can watch it.
Sure. Yeah, I've started writing that up as a paper, but I haven't finished that yet.
Right, there are two facts about aliens that always troubled me about them. So one is that they look too much like us. It was too human, in other words, but we just found a way to get around that one conversion to, or two, they caused us in some way. And then number two is that the rate of technological progress should be so quick that they would be unrecognizable. There would be no through line to even call them aliens across the decades, especially across the centuries. But you've managed to find a way around that as well. That's fascinating. So now what I'm wondering, I'm sorry to get off on this idea shooting back and forth, but
no, these are fun things to think about.
Great. Now what I'm wondering is, imagine if I have let's just say a fish tank, for lack of a better word, and that fish tank, I can turn up the rate at which time passes on it. So again, this is like that movie analogy. It's going at a trillion times our speed. Okay, so I'm turning it up. What I want to do is I want to test out. Imagine I'm just testing out. How is life going to work in this scenario? So I can start it. Maybe it's even, there's a word for this, panspermia?
Yeah.
Right, okay. So I test out. What is this going to look like? Then I come back and I look. What is, I wonder if that's what's going on. I wonder if we are just some experiment for them.
The whole alien abduction phenomenon is very strange. There's a lot of strange aspects to it. And one thing that bothers me is that if the number of people who claim to be abducted if that's actually correct, if they actually have been, then the question is why and what are they doing to them? Because you don't need to abduct 1 million people to do a scientific experiment on the human body, right? You only need maybe 1,000 or so. So way too many people are getting abducted. So the question is, what is actually happening would be the next question I'd have if the abductions are real, of course.
Right. Have you found any credible evidence to the alien abductions, and have you found any material that's foreign embedded within some people? I know that some people claim.
No, I know that there is a group, at least one group, that is studying alien abductions in a more detailed way, but that's all that I know about.
Okay, let's talk about Bob Lazar. Why are you suspicious of Bob Lazar? Not that I'm not suspicious or suspicious, I'm just curious, because someone who studies aliens, to me, they just accept what Bob says, especially because it validates what they've been thinking.
Right. I'm suspicious because he supposedly has a background in physics. He claims to have a master's degree in physics. And when he describes, he's careful about describing the physics with enough detail to be tantalizing, but not enough detail for you to be able to tell whether it's correct or not.
Can that not simply be a function of ignorance? So, for example, he just doesn't know beyond that point because it's not clear how the craft work.
That could be part of it. He just might not know. Yeah, no, I mean, that could be part of it. I just get the impression that he's walking that I get the impression he's purposefully walking that line between, of giving enough information to be tantalizing and sounding, realistic without giving you enough information to be able to test it.
Have you watched any of his technical talks? I only know of one. Maybe there are more. I don't know if I sent it to you. There was one from the 80s.
I don't know. I would like to see it, I guess. I'd like to watch it.
I should have sent that to you because he talks about how he thinks the craft work, and there are diagrams, and then he also refers to element 115. I'm sure you've heard that over and over.
Right.
Which is interesting because he associates the strong force as gravity number 2 or gravity number 1, which is, to me, one of the reasons I got interested in this, Kevin, is because I'm interested in the fundamental laws of the universe. And so how do you unify QFT with GR? Okay.
Right.
Now, if you're claiming that the strong force has something to do with gravity, that to me is extremely interesting.
Right. Yeah.
Have you heard him talk about the strong force in that manner? And then what's right
No,
or
I've
incorrect about
heard
it?
that he's said that, but that's all that I know about it. So I'd like to watch that talk, actually. That would be fun.
Me and you have to have another conversation after you watch that.
All right.
If you don't
Certainly.
mind, that would be wonderful.
I would love to.
Okay, you said I've been in contact with Eric Bard, who is currently a PI at Skinwalker Ranch. PI meaning private investigator?
No, principal investigator. Like, he's the principal scientist. He is working for Brandon Fugel, who owns the ranch, and they're performing their own studies. So I don't really get a lot of information from him about, events or details. So, but we have talked about, possibly, sharing information at some point.
He's contacting you because you're one of the few that are actually taking this seriously, or you contacted him, or what?
I contacted him initially because I was working and am still working on trying to get satellite imagery of UFOs or UAPs. And since they had sightings on the ranch, and they know the place and the time, those would be good candidates to get archived satellite imagery. So you could get a third party confirmation that, from space that, yeah, there's a disc there hovering over the ground.
Why can't you do that with any of the other reports?
You can.
Obviously, some of them are older, but what about Nimitz?
Yeah, well, you should be able to, and I've been working in that direction. So the difficulties I've had mainly have to do with my contacts at the satellite companies. They're usually doing this as a favor, pulling images, and once, we get to the point where they realize that I'm looking for UFO images, then I think it's like, well, their opinion becomes more like, well, I have real work to do. So, well, that's going to have to go to the back burner. It's unfortunate because I think it's potentially you have a big discovery, and this third-party data would be really useful. And so I'm still hopeful that we can do something like this.
There are satellites orbiting the Earth that are taking pictures of virtually every part of the Earth, and they're third party. That doesn't violate any laws by the government.
No, I don't know what the laws are, but I know that there are several companies that have global coverage, and very, in relatively short time intervals. So
that's interesting. I didn't know about that. As for spacecraft, so we're nearing the end of our spacecraft question. Then we'll get to the physics.
Okay.
Great. So as for the UFO spacecraft, do you imagine that they're taking advantage of some new physics? And when I say new physics, what I mean is physics that we don't understand. So maybe like Lazar is correct with the strong force being a gravitational one, or maybe there's a fifth force, or maybe they're utilizing your partially ordered set manner of constructing space-time from the ground up. Or do you think it's just technological sophistication in the same way that a cell phone, if the cell phone isn't using any new physics, quote unquote, since the 1950s, we pretty much could understand how this operated. It's just the technical sophistication. Do you imagine it's technical sophistication or the utilization of new physics?
It's a good question. I suspect that there is some new physics. And the reason I think that is because we don't see... These things appear to be violating conservation of momentum. So when the object takes off, at this huge acceleration, there ought to be something moving the other way, right? And that we don't observe that. So you have that problem. The fact that they move through air almost effortlessly with no sonic booms is a problem. So for instance, that the Tic Tac object that was observed on radar to drop from 28,000 feet to sea level in 0.78 seconds. At the midpoint, it had to be going about 35,000 miles an hour. That's Mach 60, right? That's crazy. And that's as fast as the New Horizons probe, went to Pluto. So that little Tic Tac object, basically, as it dropped to sea level, accelerated to the speed of the New Horizons probe within 0.4 seconds, which is really remarkable. And so it did that without a sonic boom, and it's not clear how that's possible. So it really does look like there's some new physics involved. And then for people who then question the question always often comes up: why do you assume that these are spacecraft? And the answer is really simple: because they travel at the speeds of spacecraft. They travel at those speeds, and they travel with accelerations that would not only make them viable interstellar craft, but it would make them excellent interstellar craft. So,
do you believe that they have some base on Earth? That's actually where I thought you were going with your little theory before, when we were talking about why is it
the traveling and the
yeah. I thought that you were going to say that, well, perhaps they're not going home. Perhaps they're not leaving Earth. I thought you were going there. But do you believe that they have some base on Earth? Maybe under the water, maybe on the other side of the moon, as some people.
I think there's been a lot of suspicion that, a lot of talk that there could be underwater bases. 75% of the Earth's surface is water, and we really have very little access to it. So if you are going to hide out somewhere, that's perfect. And then, to be honest, if you're aquatic in the first place, let's say that you come from an aquatic environment. Aquatic environments on planets are going to be much better to live in than atmospheric environments. Atmospheres have a low heat capacity, so the temperature varies a lot throughout the day even, right? You get huge temperature variations. And then going from planet to planet, you have huge temperature variations in the atmosphere. Go to Mars and you're looking at 100 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. You go to Venus and you're looking at 800 degrees Fahrenheit. It's dramatic. And the air pressure is dramatically different, from planet to planet. So here we have 1 atmosphere of air pressure. You go to Mars, it's 1/100th. And you go to Venus, it's 100 times. So you've got 4 orders of magnitude of variation of air pressure. And then, of course, air doesn't do much for protecting you from cosmic rays and meteorites, right? So there's all sorts of problems with living on a surface protected only by an atmosphere. But if you live in an ocean, going to another planet with an ocean is actually a pretty good thing. If it's a water ocean, then a water ocean on another planet is going to be between the temperatures of 32 degrees Fahrenheit and 212 degrees Fahrenheit. So the temperatures aren't going to change dramatically from ocean to ocean, going from one planet to another. And because water's not compressible, the pressures aren't going to change that dramatically either. The pressures are going to be a function of gravity. But, a very deep ocean on Europa, the pressure halfway down, maybe 30 miles down into Europa's ocean is going to be similar to the pressure at the bottom of our oceans, only 5 miles down. So you can actually find a nice place to hang out if that's the pressure you're used to. The main differences are going to be chemicals dissolved in the ocean. So are there some chemicals that are poisonous to you in that ocean, or biologics? If there's, bacteria and things like this, that could be problematic too. But otherwise, going from one ocean to another is almost going to be, for the most part, for survival purposes, will be very similar.
Do you think that if we were to pass over an alien civilization, presuming they're underwater, and we were able to see them, that they would sense us and then relocate quickly, or they would just allow us to observe them? Just speculating.
Oh, I don't know. That's a good question. Yeah, it's hard to speculate what somebody else would do. I'm not even sure what humans would do in that case. So,
right. Do you think that they're building a base, or do you think that they're somehow living in their craft underground, because there's not much room in those crafts, and at least I don't imagine there to be.
I don't know. 300-foot disc would be pretty good. It depends how many people you have in there.
That's fascinating. This whole topic, there's so many other questions I had for you, but I just feel like exploring this. And just so you know, I'm not someone who's into conspiracy theories or strange phenomenon. I'm much like yourself. I'm pretty sure this just like you. But this is absolutely fascinating, and it's even frightening, because what the heck are we? Like, and now I'm wondering how much of this is actually just an experiment by them, because, well, that to me makes the most sense as to why I don't think convergent evolution would produce intelligent creatures that look like us each time. I don't think so. It could be the case, but I don't buy it only because we have one data point, and maybe aliens are 2 data points. Strange.
Yeah, well, the problem is that the thing that I wonder about is if they're DNA based, right? If they have the same kind of biochemistry that we do, then it's hard to imagine that we're not related in some way, right? So are they from, so then you start wondering about all the are they from here? Which would be very surprising. Are they from here? Did we really miss something big? Did they come from here originally and go somewhere else and are coming back? Are they from another system where there was some kind of panspermia between, that led to, biology spreading from one system to another, so that we're of the same, so that we're somehow biologically related to one another. Otherwise, I'd imagine it would be very much, the situation you would expect would be very much more like what Stuart Kaufman from the Santa Fe Institute would have described, where you have the biology is probably very different, and you run the risk of, you don't want to touch them because you're going to, your biology isn't compatible, so there's going to be all sorts of horrible chemical reactions. So
you wouldn't want to touch them?
Yeah, well, you don't want to come in contact with their organic molecules because you don't know what kind of reactions you'd have. So in Stuart Kaufman's talked about autocatalytic sets, where you get sets of organic molecules that autocatalyze, right? And so our biology is basically one whole system of these types of chemicals. So we're all compatible with each other, but if you get another organic molecule in that's foreign, that's going to interact with different ways and create all sorts of new types of molecules. So
I haven't heard of that before.
Yeah.
So that is Stuart Kaufman.
Stuart Kaufman, yeah.
Autocatalytic sets or autocatalytic molecules or what?
Autocatalytic sets, I think it was. And I think it was his book At Home in the Universe, I believe it is. But, the implications from that is if there were aliens who were truly alien, they were, made of, they're carbon based, then the chance that the molecules are similar is going to be problematic.
Why do you think they mutilate cattle?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know if they do. I mean, the real answer to a lot of these is we don't know anything yet about these things. And we don't know if these things are all related.
Okay, sorry. What could be a reason they mutilate cattle? Let's say it like that.
Yeah, are they doing experiments? Are they collecting data? That's a good question.
Why cattle?
I don't know.
Well, cattle are the most plentiful of all the animals, actually, by weight at least.
Yeah, I had a thought. I had an idea, and I'll share the idea with you. So this is, not even at the level of a hypothesis, right? This is just a thought. So Ray Stanford, who has studied UFOs in the 70s, refers to a sense of, he calls it euphoria, spelled UFORIA, euphoria.
Okay.
And he says that when you are near one of these craft, you have a feeling of euphoria. And he's recorded electromagnetic variations in the electromagnetic field from these things, and those variations happen around 12 hertz. So that's interesting because 12 hertz is close to the alpha rhythm frequencies that you get in the visual cortex when you close your eyes.
Okay. Wait, sorry, I just want to make sure I'm understanding this. So who's this person who's saying this?
Ray Stanford.
Okay, so Ray Stanford is saying that there's a phenomenon called euphoria.
Yeah.
Okay, and he's defining this phenomenon right now. He's not referring to something else.
Yeah, the phenomenon is a feeling that you get, the sense of euphoria, actually. It's spelled the usual
So it's related
way.
to euphoria. It's related to happiness?
Yeah.
Because I know that some people feel abject terror.
Yeah, certainly, yeah. But he says that when the craft are just near, even if you're not aware of them, you'll get that sense of euphoria. And he claims to use this to go, he'll have that feeling and then go outside and, oh, yeah, there it is. There's one. And takes photos. And so he's done that in the past, and that's what he claims. So I was curious about this because he had also measured variations in the electric field that are around on the order of 12 hertz, which is close to our alpha.
Variations where they're reported?
Yeah, so when he's taking photos of a UFO, he has equipment that measures, EM fields, so he'll measure the electric and magnetic field. And you get variations, oscillations at about 12 hertz are prominent sometimes. So that kind of caught my attention because, and this is where the thought comes in, right? This is his claim. I have not seen this myself. I've not measured it. And so I can't, testify to how true it is. But my thought, what struck me was that 12 hertz is close to your alpha rhythm. And so if you have strong oscillating electric and magnetic fields near these things, you're going to induce currents into the brain. And if these currents are at 12 hertz, they could entrain the alpha rhythm. You can actually entrain alpha rhythms. So you could entrain an alpha rhythm, which could very well make you feel, calm or restful or sleepy or, euphoric or something like that. Now, of course, this could be overridden by the terror of seeing, this craft and, aliens coming out of it or whatever might happen. But that was my thought. Well, maybe that's where the euphoria comes from. It comes from these oscillations in the electric field. And then it made me think that, and I had this thought watching the video from Skinwalker Ranch of the disc in the sky with the cow dying, right? The cow was dying while the disc was hovering over it.
Where was this from?
This was taken at Skinwalker Ranch, and it was in their TV series, their documentary series.
Right. What's the host's name? Travis Taylor?
Travis Taylor, yep.
Is that the series you're referring to?
That's the one, yeah.
I would like to talk to Travis. Have you ever spoken to him?
Yeah, I have. I've met him. He's an interesting guy. Yeah. So in that case, you had the disc is hovering some distance above the cow. The cow actually died there, and it was acting funny beforehand, and it made me think, well, the cow's brains are different sizes, and I don't know what frequency their alpha rhythm is at. So I thought, what if these craft are inducing currents into the cow's brain, and then it makes them panic or something instead of giving them the sense of euphoria?
That's fascinating.
And so maybe
that.
So what if they're killing the cows by accident? So here's just a thought. They're killing the cows by accident, right? And then they're trying to figure out why the cows are dying whenever they fly near them, right? So then they go down and they did take some samples and collect some data to figure out why the cows are dying. Maybe that it's a thought. That's all.
Yeah.
It's a fun thought. It's fun to think of things. And so
yeah. Yes. There does seem to be an association with radiation, especially electromagnetic radiation and these craft. From that TV series, I recall them saying that all of the cows at Skinwalker were placed into one room the size of this condo, and it was magnetized. Do you remember that? That all the cows were placed in there, and it was locked.
Yeah, there was something bizarre. Yeah, there's several bizarre stories having to do with the cattle.
Now, what the heck can explain that?
I don't know what can explain half of what I've heard happens at Skinwalker Ranch. So that's all. That is a.
Okay, let's talk about Skinwalker for
That's a whole other kettle of fish.
Let's open this kettle of fish. With Skinwalker, there seems to be reports of ghosts, Bigfoot, and so like, every phenomenon. That's
pretty
paranormal.
much everything you've ever heard of. It happens there, which is very, very bizarre.
What's the relationship? What could be? How about that? What could be the relationship between UFOs and the rest of other paranormal activity? Like, why? So here's one. Here's one simple answer. That when the aliens are nearby, in the same way that they induce a different conscious state, then in the same way that low frequency sounds, I'm sure you've heard of this, low frequency sounds can produce reports of ghost sightings. Maybe there's something similar happening. But then that wouldn't explain any actual footage, like, or intersubjective agreement as to, oh, I saw an animal that looked like this over there. I would imagine that it would just produce strange phenomena, and each person would have a different.
Yeah, intersubjective agreement is a good term. I've often heard. Yeah, it wouldn't explain that. You know, I've heard professionals claim, "Oh, it's a mass hallucination," and then I have to remind them, you know, that's not a thing either, right? That's not a real phenomenon either. So, yeah, I don't know what could explain this.